Hi everybody and welcome back to Be Like Christ. In today's video, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to do a book review and a movie review of the brand new release, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. So on April 7th, this movie came out, The Case for Christ, and it's based off this book that I believe has been around for several decades. This book was written by a man named Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel was an atheist, and his wife was an atheist, and he was a journalist for the Chicago Tribune, a very good one. He was Yale educated, and he was the legal editor at a very young age for the Tribune. He's surprised one day by his wife, who comes home and says, "Lee, I've become a Christian." And this not only frustrates him, but it kind of makes him angry. And he's bent on using his journalistic prowess to prove the case for Christ wrong. Both the movie and the book are all centered around this exploration of the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. But there are some significant differences. And so maybe you're wondering whether you should read the book or go see the movie, and maybe I can help with this review. The book is very methodical, it's very systematic, and it's very heavily centered on the apologetic information. The book is all about 13 interviews that Lee sits down in with apologetic experts, people who believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus for historical or scientific or medical or psychological reasons. And they discuss why they believe there is a case for Jesus. I took some notes on the book, and I'd like to just read you the 13 topics that are discussed. The first interview centers around the biographies of Jesus, the Gospels. Can we trust them to actually have been written by the people they say they were written by? Interview number 2 is with Bruce Metzger, who a lot of people know, and it's about the reliability of biblical manuscripts. Interview number 3, the historicity of Jesus. Can we prove he was an actual man from historical evidence? Number 4 is the archaeology of the cross and of the resurrection and of Jesus' life. Number 5 is centered around skepticism in Christianity, within the Christian worldview. Things like the Jesus Seminar, people who attribute credibility to the Gospel of Thomas, things like that, the Gnostic Gospels. Interview number 6, who did Jesus believe he was? Did Jesus even believe he was God? Did he teach that he was God? Or did he teach that he was just a great teacher? Interview number 7 is with Gary Collins, and it's a question, was Jesus mentally all there? Was he actually a sane man? Or was he just a crazy man? Interview number 8 were the characteristics of Jesus' deity and the question of the incarnation. Interview number 9 is with Louis Lapides, who is a converted Jew. His interview centers around, did Jesus fit the description of the Messiah that was prophesied in the Old Testament? Interview 10 was a medical examination of the cross. Can we prove that Jesus actually died on the cross? Or can things like the swoon theory have a legitimate place in the discussion of the cross? Interview 11 is with William Lane Craig, who many people know. That was, did the resurrection actually happen? Is there any evidence for it? Interview 12 is the evidences of the appearance, of his appearances after his death. The 500 witnesses, the women at the tomb, the apostles seeing him after his death. Can those be trusted? And then finally, interview number 13 is circumstantial evidence. Now, let's talk a little bit about the movie. The movie is significantly different, although the main themes still run through it. The movie is much more dramatized. It's much more designed for Hollywood. And let me begin by saying that I know many Christians stray away from Christian movies because the acting is terrible. Let's just be honest. The acting is terrible. The scripts are terrible. The cinematography is terrible. And they're just kind of like low budget. Just, you don't want to go see them. and I'll just begin by saying this is not one of those movies. The acting is professional level. Cinematography is professional level. The script is very good. And you won't be disappointed on that front. The movie is done up for Hollywood, though. It's much more dramatized than the book. The movie centers much more around the family strife that existed because of Lee's questioning, because of his atheism when his wife was a Christian, and their interactions with different people in their lives at that time, including his father, including his family. So there's a lot more thrown into it, and it takes a lot of time developing that family focus rather than dealing with the apologetics. In the movie, Lee goes to about 5 or 6 interviews, I think. It doesn't show all of the interviews that are in the book, and it shows that he's engaging them just kind of in very quick, very casual conversations, like he's interrupting them during their work and just running some questions by them and then walking out. So the movie really leaves you with a very brief examination of the issues. So I've got my notes here, and I wanted to talk about a couple things that I really liked about the movie and a couple things I didn't like about the movie. I think the number one thing I really loved about the movie and the book is that it encourages a spirit of fair investigation. Lee's an atheist. He even kind of has a reason to want to believe that there is no God and that he's not accountable to him, because he even says in the book, I wasn't living the way that I should, and I liked living that way. But he still undertakes a fair investigation of the facts. And I think that's so important for not only an atheist examining the theist worldview, but also for theists to examine the atheist worldview. And that may sound strange, but let me explain. I can't tell you how many times I've heard atheists, either online or on YouTube or in real life, misrepresent what Christians really believe. And it makes me so mad, because a lot of times I don't have direct access to them if they're online or something like that, and I can't correct that we don't believe that, or that, that's a total, you totally misrepresent the Christian position. And so I get really frustrated when they do that. But let me say this also. I've also heard, not being, easy on my side as well, I've also heard many, many times where I've been in a church building or I've been in a Christian conference or whatever, and I've heard theists terribly misrepresent and dumb down what the atheist position is. And to the point where I would say any atheist who has half an education on what they espouse to believe would never make the argument that we just told our whole congregation they would make. It's so important that we are able to engage people on an educated level, because I know a lot of times when somebody comes up to me and attacks my beliefs, my temper's immediately up and I'm on the defensive, and I just want to make them look as stupid as I possibly can in order to win an argument and to prove my side to be right. But one thing we really have to be careful about when we do that is that we actually may be losing the main reason for engaging someone at all if that's our approach. Because as Christians, our goal is to help people see the glory of Jesus. It's to help people see what he's done for us so they can take advantage of it and have their sins forgiven and end up in eternity with God, with us. It's not just to win. And so you may win an argument and lose a soul. And if that's the case, you haven't really gained anything. So know what the other side believes, engage them based on what they believe, and point to the facts that I believe and Lee Strobel believes, point to Jesus ultimately. We should never be afraid of the truth. We believe the truth is on our side. We believe Jesus was a historical figure, that he actually died and was resurrected, and we believe the facts point there. And so there should be no fear in investigating what the other side believes and comparing and contrasting that to what we believe. There are 2 things that I think I would say were negatives or things I didn't like about the book. One of them is unavoidable. And the first one I want to mention is just that this book was written a while ago. And so you're not going to hear the most cutting edge scientific research or archaeological research or even maybe the most cutting edge arguments for or against the resurrection of Jesus in this text. The second thing I didn't like about the book was something I thought was a little bit more serious, and it's a theological issue. The end of the book and the end of the movie both show Lee having accepted all the facts and realizing that he needs Jesus, and that he prays a prayer, and his wife says, if you pray this prayer, then you'll be a Christian. And I disagree with that theologically, because I don't see that in the scriptures. Everything that I've seen in the scriptures seem to tell us that faith is always accompanied by baptism, and that baptism is how we get into Christ, not just through a prayer. Every conversion we see in the New Testament seems to bear that out. And the precedent that we see in the first couple hundred years of the early church baptism is always the point of conversion. And that makes sense in light of Romans 6, where the Bible says that baptism is how we get into Jesus. And the image makes sense too. Jesus died, he was buried and resurrected to a glorified life. We die to our old selves, we're buried in that water, and then we rise. And it's when we rise that we have that new life. So I know that's a controversial issue. I know that you may disagree with me entirely, and I would love for you to tell me why you think I'm wrong. If you do, put it in the comments. You're not going to offend me. I'd love to have an educated discussion about what the Bible really says and the interpretation there. So let me very briefly say who I think would be more interested in the book versus the movie. If you're someone who's just looking for a little bit of entertainment, or maybe you think you may be interested in apologetics issues, but you're not really sure and you're not really ready to sit down and read 10 hours worth of apologetic facts and figures, then maybe the book is the best place, the movie is the best place for you to go to get your feet wet and then transition to the book. If you're somebody who knows you're interested in apologetics and examining the case of whether Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection is real, go straight to the book. I don't think you'll miss seeing the movie. That being said, let me also say this about the book. If you're somebody who's already really heavily involved in apologetics, the book may not be for you. And the reason I say that is because it's a relatively short book, and yet it covers 13 very different topics of apologetics. The book kind of hits the highlights of every one of those points. And if you're already into apologetics, you probably know most of those highlights. So you might be more interested in a book that takes 1 or 2 or 3 of those interview topics and digs deep into those topics. In conclusion, you can go see the movie if you want to, but you're definitely going to get more out of the book. And I think it's a fantastic foundation for any Christian to kind of have a basic understanding of why we believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead, and to be able to defend that against some of the more popular arguments against it. The whole Christian faith hinges on the resurrection. Like Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, if there is no resurrection, then your faith is vain. There's no reason to believe the things you believe. If Jesus couldn't beat death, what makes you think you can? One of the best things I think you can do as a Christian is to begin an apologetic study of your faith. Whether that's an examination of how the world came into existence, creation, or the age of the earth, or whether the Gospels and the manuscripts and the Bible can be trusted, whether they're actually inspired, evidences through prophecy, whatever it may be. Whether you begin here with Lee Strobel or not, begin an apologetic study. I guarantee you it'll strengthen your faith. And like all of these experts said in this book, their investigations and their studies made their faith stronger.